The rain had been falling over Norfolk, Virginia for 3 hours straight, a steady, drumming downpour that turned the sidewalks into mirrors, reflecting the neon lights of the dive bars lining the street. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Mac Donovan sat at the corner of the polished oak bar, his calloused fingers wrapped around a glass of bourbon he had barely touched. He was still in his working uniform, the dark navy material darkened further by the rain, the prestigious seal trident pinned above his left breast pocket glinting under the dim light. At 42, with 20 years of service and more combat deployments than he cared to count, Mac had seen things that would break lesser men. But tonight, it wasn't the memory of gunfire or the desert heat that weighed on him. It was the paperwork, the medical review board, and the probable end of his career due to a knee that had finally given out after a decade of abuse. The bar was the usual Tuesday night crowd, active duty guys from the local bases, a few retirees, and the perpetual group of locals who came to gawk at the military crowd. Near the pool tables, a cluster of young sailors from the USS Coleman, freshly returned from a 7-month deployment, were laughing loudly, their voices cutting through the ambient noise of the jukebox. They were buying each other shots, their movements loose with the freedom of being back on dry land. And then there was her. She sat alone at a small table near the window, a half-empty glass of soda water with lime in front of her. She was in her late 20s with sharp and intelligent eyes that scanned the room with the quiet assessment of someone who had been trained to notice exits and threats. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans. But it was her arms that drew the eye. From her wrists, disappearing under her sleeves and presumably covering her shoulders and back, was an intricate tapestry of ink. It wasn't the random collection of flash art that covered the arms of the sailors at the pool tables. This was different. It was precise. It told a story. The sailors, now well into their 4th or 5th round, had noticed her too. One of them, a cocky engineman 3rd class with a fresh fade haircut and a mouth full of liquid courage, nudged his buddies. "Check out the ink on the broad by the window," he said. Just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Think she ran out of wall space at the parlor?" His friends laughed. Another one, a slender information systems technician, chimed in. "Maybe she's keeping a log of all her ex-boyfriends' names. Gotta be a long list to cover that much real estate." The woman didn't look up. She simply lifted her glass, took a slow sip, and continued staring out the rain-streaked window. Her composure, her refusal to acknowledge them, seemed to agitate the engineman. He was used to a reaction. He was a sailor, back from the sea, and in his mind, he was the center of this universe. "Hey," he called out, raising his voice. "Sweetheart, I'm talking to you. What's with the tattoo sleeve? You in a biker gang or something? You look like you fell in a vat of ink." His friends snickered, but a few of the older patrons, including Mac, shifted uncomfortably. Mac watched the scene unfold. His eyes narrowed. He was waiting to see how she would handle it. Would she shrink? Would she yell? Would she cry? She did none of those things. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head and fixed the young sailor with a gaze that was as cold and calm as deep ocean water. It was a look that Mac recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had stared down threats far more serious than a drunk 22-year-old. It was the look of someone who had been in a firefight and hadn't blinked, but the sailor was too drunk and too stupid to read the room. Emboldened by her silence, he stood up and took a few unsteady steps toward her table. "I'm just saying," he slurred, waving a hand at her arms. "It's a little much. Don't you think? I mean, what are you trying to prove? That you're tough? You're sitting in a bar alone on a Tuesday. Real tough." He reached out as if to grab her wrist and get a better look at the ink. He never made contact. In a fluid motion that was almost too fast to follow, the woman was on her feet. She didn't strike him. She didn't have to. She simply stood, and the shift in her posture was enough. Her shoulders went back, Her chin lifted, and she seemed to grow 6 inches. The energy around her changed. The air crackled with a lethal kind of authority. "Sit down, sailor," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the bar noise like a blade. It was a voice accustomed to command. "You've had too much to drink and you're embarrassing yourself." The engineman blinked, momentarily stunned by the command in her tone. But his friends were watching, and his pride was on the line. "Or what?" he blustered. "You gonna ink me to death?" "That's enough." The voice wasn't hers. It was Mac. He had slid off his bar stool and was walking toward them, his expression unreadable, but his presence immense. He stopped next to the woman, placing himself slightly between her and the sailor, but his eyes were fixed on the young man. "You're out of line. Go back to your friends and cool off." The engineman looked at Mac, saw the senior chief's uniform, the trident, the hard eyes, and for a moment he looked like he might argue. But the survival instinct, dulled by alcohol, flickered back to life. He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whatever, old man. Just trying to have a conversation." He stumbled back to his table, muttering to his friends. Mac turned to the woman. "You okay?" She looked at him, and the hard shell cracked just slightly. A tiny, wry smile touched her lips. "I've handled worse. But thank you. You didn't have to do that." "The hell I didn't," Mac said. He gestured to the empty chair at her table. "Mind if I sit? My bourbon's getting warm at the bar, and I'd rather not drink it listening to those idiots pat each other on the back." She nodded. "Suit yourself." He sat, signaling the waitress for his drink. Up close, the tattoos on her arms were even more stunning. They weren't just pictures. They were a chronicle. A Black Hawk helicopter, its rotors blurring in a masterpiece of shading. A compass rose with coordinates he didn't recognize. A field of poppies, their red petals stark against the black and gray of the other work. And a phrase, our inelegant script that ran along her forearm. "Chaos and Old Night." Mac nodded toward the ink. "Those aren't just for show." She looked down at her arms as if seeing them for the first time. "No, they're not. Mind if I ask what they mean? Or is that too personal?" She studied him for a long moment, assessing him just as thoroughly as he had assessed her. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. "The helicopter," she said, pointing to the intricate design on her right bicep. "That's the bird I was a crew chief on. 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers." Mac felt a jolt of respect shoot through him. The 161st SOAR, the elite of the elite, the pilots and crews who flew the black helicopters on the most dangerous missions in the dead of night. "Night Stalkers," he repeated, the name carrying weight. That explains the chaos and old night quote. Milton, right? Paradise Lost?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise. "Most people think it's from a movie. They don't know it's Milton." She looked at him with new interest. "You read?" "When I can. Mostly military history and strategy. But I had an English teacher in high school who was a retired Marine. He made us read Milton. Said if we wanted to understand the nature of true warfare, we had to understand the war in heaven first." Mac chuckled. "Didn't make sense then. Makes a little more sense now." The ice was broken. Her name was Elena, she told him. Chief Warrant Officer 2. Elena Vance, though she was currently on medical leave. She had been the first female crew chief in her unit, a pioneer in a world of absolute darkness and whispered legend. Now she had flown into hot spots that didn't exist on any map, extracted teams that were moments from being overrun, and logged more hours in the pitch black, flying by the green glow of night vision, than most pilots logged in daylight. As she talked, she traced the tattoos on her left arm. "These are the missions," she said quietly. "The coordinates are where we went in. The poppies are for Afghanistan. The dragon is for an op in the Philippines." She paused at a particular image, a simple, stark black cross. That one is for the friends who didn't come back. Mac listened, fascinated. He told her about his own career, his own battles, his own ghosts. They traded stories like currency, two soldiers who spoke the same brutal, beautiful language of service and sacrifice. He told her about his knee, about the review board, about the fear of being forced out. She listened with genuine empathy. "It's not the same," she said softly. "But I know what it's like to have your identity ripped away. When I got hurt, landing accident, shattered my tibia, I thought my life was over. The army, the Night Stalkers, that's all I was. That's all I knew how to be. What did you do?" She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a deep, profound sadness in her eyes, but also an unshakable strength. "I found another way to serve. I found another way to carry the weight. The tattoos, they're my logbook now, my diary. They remind me that I'm still here, that the missions, the friends, the sacrifices, they're all still a part of me, even if I can't fly anymore." They talked for another hour, the noise of the bar fading into a distant hum. When the waitress announced last call, Mac realized he hadn't thought about the medical board all night. He hadn't thought about the pain in his knee. He had only thought about the woman in front of him and the incredible story inked into her skin. As they stood to leave, the pack of young sailors from the USS Coleman also stumbled toward the door. The engineman, his ego still bruised, couldn't resist one last parting shot. As he passed them, he looked Elena up and down and sneered, loud enough for the remaining patrons to hear. "Hey, Picasso, nice art. Did you get a discount for buying in bulk?" His friends snickered, the sound tired and pathetic in the near-empty bar. Elena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Mac placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "Don't. He's not worth it." But just then, out the front door of the bar swung open. A cold gust of wind and rain swept inside, and with it came a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a leather jacket over a civilian shirt, but his bearing was unmistakably military. His eyes, sharp and clear, swept the room and landed instantly on Elena. He walked straight toward her, ignoring everyone else. The young sailors, seeing the size and demeanor of the newcomer, instinctively shuffled out of his way. He stopped in front of Elena, and a wide, genuine smile broke across his weathered face. "Chief Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They told me I might find you here." Elena's face lit up with surprise and recognition. "Colonel Briggs?" The man, Colonel Briggs, reached out and grasped her hand firmly, then pulled her into a brief, fatherly hug. "Heard you were in town. Couldn't leave without saying hello to one of my best crew chiefs." The young sailors were frozen in place by the door, watching the scene unfold. The engine man's face had gone pale. Colonel Briggs stepped back, holding Elena at arm's length. He noticed the looks she was getting from the group near the exit. He noticed the tension in her shoulders. He looked at the sailors, then back at Elena, his expression turning serious. "These boys giving you trouble, Chief?" Before Elena could answer, the colonel's gaze fell to the intricate tattoo of the Black Hawk on her arm. He recognized it instantly. He reached out, not to touch it, but to point. "Is that the bird from the Shahikot Valley mission? The one during Anaconda?" Elena nodded. "Yes, sir. March 2002. Colonel Briggs's eyes widened. He looked from the tattoo to her face, and his expression shifted from recognition to profound respect. "My God," he breathed. "I remember that after-action report. You took fire from 3 different directions. Your bird was hit so bad the hydraulics were shot, and you still held her steady while the assault element fast-roped onto a hot LZ'd. You saved an entire platoon that night." The bar had gone completely silent. The sailors from the Coleman were no longer moving toward the door. They were rooted to the spot, their mouths slightly agape. The waitress had stopped wiping down the bar. Mac stood beside Elena, a quiet sense of awe settling over him. Elena shook her head modestly. "I was just doing my job, sir." The pilots did the real work." Colonel Briggs shook his head vehemently. "Don't you dare downplay it, Chief. That mission is taught at the Army's aviation school as a case study in courage under fire." He looked again at the tattoo, his voice thick with emotion. "You wear that history on your arm. You wear the legacy of the Night Stalkers." He then noticed the group of young sailors hovering nearby, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dawning horror. He looked at them, then back at Elena. He understood immediately what had been happening. The colonel straightened his posture. He turned to face the sailors fully. Then, in a move that seemed to suck all the air out of the room, he snapped to attention. He raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect salute, aimed directly at Elena. "Chief Warrant Officer Vance," he said, his voice ringing with authority and respect. "On behalf of the United States Army and every soldier whose life you've touched, thank you for your service." Elena, her eyes glistening, stood a little taller. She returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you, Colonel. It was my honor." The silence in the bar was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. The young engineman looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His friends stared at their boots. The woman they had mocked, the woman whose tattoos they had ridiculed as ugly and excessive, had just been saluted by a full-bird colonel for an act of heroism so profound it was studied in military academies. Mac watched it all, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at Elena, and he no longer saw just a woman with tattoos. He saw a warrior. He saw a Night Stalker. He saw a piece of living history. Colonel Briggs dropped his salute and turned to the sailors. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to reprimand them. The silence and the look in his eyes were punishment enough. "I suggest," he said quietly, "that you boys learn to show a little more respect. You never know who you're talking to, and you never know what the ink on their skin really means." The sailors shuffled out into the rain without another word. Later, Mac walked Elena to her car. The rain had softened to a light drizzle. "You know," he said, "I came in there tonight feeling sorry for myself, thinking my career was over, that I was done." She leaned against her car, looking at him. "And now?" He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Now I realize that what we do, what we've done, it doesn't end because we leave the service. It just changes form. It becomes part of us, like your ink, like my memories. It's still there. It still matters." She nodded. "It always will." They exchanged numbers, two soldiers who had found an unexpected friend in a rainy bar. As Mac watched her drive away, he looked down at his own hands, unadorned by ink, but scarred by a life of service. He thought about what story he might tell, if he ever decided to wear his history on his skin. He walked back into the night, the rain washing over him, but for the first time in months, he felt clean. He felt seen. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that the medical board could take his career, but it could never take away the man he had become. The woman with the mocked tattoos had reminded him of that. She had reminded him that true valor is often silent, often hidden, but it is always, always there, waiting for the moment when someone who understands finally sees it and snaps a salute.